Hello students, welcome back to the part 2 of the Anthropology Paper-1 discussion. Now in this particular section, just like the previous section that we discussed, that we are going to talk about what is going to be the important aspect of each of this question, and we are also going to see that what is going to be the levels of interrelation that can be brought in. And let's start, as this particular section is dominated by physical anthropology questions. Let's start. Now here, question number 5a, it is talking about the balanced and transient genetic polymorphism. Now in this particular question, you were supposed to define what is genetic polymorphism, and there is a definition that is given by Ford. It says that it is nothing but the presence of two or more discontinuous alleles. That is given by Ford. This has to be given. And once you talk about this, then you can talk about that a simple flowchart can be given that this genetic polymorphism happens at DNA level. The genetic polymorphism happens at cell level. And apart from that, this also happens at the gene product level. So with such an understanding given to this genetic polymorphism, then we can talk about what is the fundamental difference between the balanced polymorphism as well as transient polymorphism. Because you know that there is also another third type with respect to polymorphism, that is the permanent polymorphism. And when I talk about this balanced polymorphism, it is more of a selective advantage that is seen with respect to this, and one classic example for balanced polymorphism can be ABO type. ABO type. Okay. And when I talk about this transient, with respect to this transient kind of genetic polymorphism, we talk about it is all about the process of mutation. And a very, very good example for transient kind of polymorphism, it is industrial melanism. It is industrial melanism which can be stated. Again, we can even talk about with respect to the balanced polymorphism, we can even talk about the example of sickle cell anemia and also certain lactose non-consumption studies that are done with respect to the North American population. Okay, so it's again a straightforward question that can be answered. Okay, and coming to the next question, that is with respect to the genetic imprinting in the diseases. Now when you talk about the genetic imprinting with respect to the diseases, now here it is talking about, or it is with respect to your section 9.4 in physical anthropology. And when you talk about this particular question that is seen in this context, it talks about the different aspects of formation of this particular phenomena of genetic imprinting. And when you talk about this different aspects of formation of genetic imprinting, it might be with respect to the hyperacetylation. It might be with respect to the hyperacetylation condition, or it might be with respect to the hypermethylation condition. Hypermethylation. And apart from this, it can also be with respect to the histone modification. There are three ways in which you have genetic imprinting. One is the hyperacetylation, the other one is hypermethylation, and the histone modification. Once we understand the three causative factors with respect to the genetic imprinting, then we can talk about it in the context of the epigenetic variation. We have to discuss this word called epigenetics and epigenetic variation. And when we talk about this epigenetic variation, the classic example that can be given for genetic imprinting, one classic example that is generally discussed is Angelman's syndrome. Angelman syndrome and Prader-Willi syndromes. Angelman syndrome and Prader-Willi syndrome, which acts as a complementary examples with respect to the genetic imprinting. Again, very, very simple question. See, this year the physical anthropology happens to be more of a direct basis, right? Then it talks about the stages of human prenatal development. Here you can talk about the P.L.Scammons theory. P.L.Scammons theory with respect to the developmental or the stages of development or the stages of growth. That P.L.Scammon can be stated here. And apart from this, what are the different stages that are involved with respect to the prenatal development? It's a straightforward question. Then moving on, the last two questions of your first section with respect to the section B, it is that the shaman, sorcerer and medicine man. And when we talk about this particular aspect of shaman, sorcerer and medicine man, these are nothing but magico-religious functionaries. Magico-religious functionaries. As it is known that as per the James Fraser's theory, that there is a continuum that is existing with respect to magic, religion and science. There is a continuum that is existing. On this basis of the continuum, on this basis of this continuum, you would see that there is this kind of transition that is generally observed in this aspect. And here we have to talk about that there is a kind of evolution that is happening across this different magico-religious functionaries that are present. Even Malinowski talks about such a kind of transition, right? So in this aspect, simple structure that can be seen is what is the function of each of this particular magico-religious functionaries and what is the significance that is seen with respect to these functionaries in the major societies. This can be done. Then the next one is with respect to the household and domestic group. And this household and domestic group, now again we see a continuum. We see a continuum that is existing, that family, then moving on to the household, then domestic group. There is a kind of transition that is existing among these three words that are seen. Okay, and we can talk about the L.H. Morgan's study here. We can talk about the L.H. Morgan study that is present with respect to the household and domestic group, right? Okay, next, moving further. The next question is, it is about the various socio-cultural studies. The various socio-cultural studies that are being spoken about. The various socio-cultural studies that are being spoken about. Here we have to see that discuss the mechanism of social control in different kinds of political systems. Now, when they are talking about the different mechanisms that are existing with respect to the social control, here one particular thinker that has to be stated categorically is R.C. Brown. R.C. Brown has to be stated categorically. Then apart from this, we can even talk about the certain theories that are existing with respect to the social control. The theories that are existing with respect to the social control, that might be the Henry Main's theory, or that might be the Emile Durkheim's theory, or that might be the Malinowski's theory of social control, or in toto we talk about the R.C. Brown's theory of social control. Now once we discuss about these social controls, then we can talk about that what are the different types that are existing with respect to the social control. And when we talk about these different types with respect to the social control that are existing, we see that these types can be the internalized social control, which is nothing but a socialization process that is existing. Internalized control. Then apart from that, we can talk about externalized or external social control mechanism, which talks about sanctions. And with respect to this external or with respect to the sanctions format, it can be formal or informal, or it can be diffused or organized. There are different sources of social sanctions that are existing, and each social sanction is having its own function, its own corresponding function, right? And the further it can be seen that these social sanctions can also have a classification with respect to primary and secondary aspect, right? Or it can be also seen with respect to the positive and negative aspects, right? All these classifications have to be discussed with respect to what is the mechanism that is existing, and each of this classification can be substantiated with the example. Please understand that we have to categorically talk about what are the theories that are existing with respect to the social control mechanism, right? Moving on to the next question. What is meant by the health, and is the burden of lifestyle disease on the rise? Justify your answer with the suitable examples. Now here the simplest understanding of health can be that it is asking about that what do you understand by health, and the WHO's simple understanding of health does not mean mere absence of disease, but it talks about the physical well-being, the mental well-being, as well as the psychological well-being and the social well-being of the individual is what is defined as health. That is what is the simplest understanding with respect to WHO's meaning. Then after that, now here it is categorically talking about one particular concept called epidemiological transition. Now this particular word has to be mentioned in this question, and this particular dimension has to be brought in, because it is talking about epidemiological transition. And when you look at this epidemiological transition, and when you look at the theories or stages of epidemiological transition, we see there were three different stages that were existing: the first stage, the second stage, and the third stage, right? And when you look at this, The first stage was characterized with sedentarism, and it was also characterized with infectious diseases. The second stage, with respect to the epidemiological transition, we see although there was a decline in the infectious disease, but there was an increase with respect to the NCDs. Okay, and with respect to the third, what happens is you see a double kind of burden that is existing with respect to the third stage of epidemiological transition, and you see both the infectious diseases like the pandemic that recently occurred, or the lifestyle diseases which are going to be the re-emergence, right? So this dimension has to be talked about, and this perspective has to be given to the question. And is the burden of the lifestyle on the rise? Yes, certainly it is on the rise. And when you talk about what are the fundamental aspects for it to be on rise, and it is the simplest understanding, the rise can be due to what? The rise can be, again, the rise can be due to the dietary patterns, that is especially the fat as well as the carbohydrate intake. Apart from this, then we can also talk about the increase with respect to the population. Apart from this, the increased sedentarism, right? The philosophy of couch potato, increased sedentarism, that is also another phenomenon that is existing. And apart from that, the substance abuse, that might be the culture of alcoholism, that might be the tobacco consumption, or any of these intoxication which will result in lifestyle diseases. Apart from this, we also see that there is an increase that is happening with respect to these lifestyle diseases in the recent past, and you also have to bring in the gender perspective that is existing with respect to the variation of lifestyle diseases. And this gender perspective with respect to the lifestyle diseases, we see that in the recent past there is an increasing aspect of the feminization of this concept. Right? These dimensions have to be discussed. Okay. They're asking you for suitable examples. Now, one simple example that can be talked about here is with respect to the search report. And this search report, it brings in the obesity of the women with respect to the Worli tribe. That is the increasing incidence of obesity with respect to Worli tribe due to the changing dietary patterns. This can be a case study that can be discussed here. Yet, moving on to the next question, critically evaluate the reasons of reduction. With respect to the age at menarche in human females over successive generations. And when you talk about this question, it is asking about the concept of menarche. And when we discuss this concept of menarche, it is talking about that menarche is what? It is the age at which the puberty stage is reached. Right? That is a fundamental understanding. And when you look at this question, they are asking about reasons of reduction in the human females. And when you look at this particular trend, now here one particular concept that has to be certainly talked about is the usage of the word the secular trends. Because when you discuss about secular trends, these secular trends can be positive secular trends, these secular trends can be negative secular trends, these secular trends can be neutral secular trends. The secular trends was a question in 2020. And that has to be remembered here. That particular aspect has to be mentioned because this is more of a negative secular trend for the reason that you observe there is a decline that is happening with respect to the age of menarche in the context of India. Okay. And when we look at the reasons, the major reason is increased income levels. Now with the increased income levels, the fundamental aspect is increased protein intake. And when we have increased protein intake, automatically the immediate consequence that is observed, there is a reduction in the age at menarche. That is a fundamental reason. And when we look at the various studies that are persisting with respect to the age variation in the context of menarche, we have A.M. Tripathi study. We also have Rami Reddy et al. Studies. Then apart from that, we also have the NFHS survey which talks about this variation, and such a variation is categorical with respect to the rural areas as well as the urban areas. Such a Variation is categorical with respect to rural areas and urban areas, and we can even talk about the D.N. Mazumdar's case, right? And this has to be seen across different variations. That might be the rural urban, that might be the tribe caste, or that might be the rural tribe or the hill tribe. Such a variation can be observed here. Apart from this, there can be certain studies that can be seen with respect to the studies of Bagga and Kulakarni. And when we talk about the studies of Bagga and Kulakarni, we see that there is again a varying or the reduction in the age of puberty, and this is purely due to the socio-economic conditions, the nutrition as well as the health facilities that are prevalent, right? That can be seen, and they state that there is a decline of 2 to 4 months. There is a decline of 2 to 4 months, right? This question is again, it is a composite concept which is asking about the secular trends as well as the philosophy of monarchy. Right, moving on to the next question. Discuss the role of evolutionary forces. Now, when we talk about the role of evolutionary forces, now here what is happening? The role of evolutionary forces in creating human diversity. And when we talk about this creation of human diversity, it is about what? Now it is talking about, the question is talking about the Falconer's forces. The question is talking about the Falconer's evolutionary forces. And when we categorically observe the Falconer's evolutionary forces, we see that the Falconer's evolutionary forces can be classified into two. Those can be systemic forces, and the other can be the dispersive forces. It can be systemic forces or dispersive forces. And when we talk about this systemic forces and dispersive forces, the systemic forces can be further divided into mutation. It can be further divided into migration. Then further it can be divided into selection. Okay, so it is with respect to mutation, it is with respect to migration, it is with respect to the selection part. So one aspect is the systemic forces that are present. Apart from that, we also have the dispersive forces. And when we talk about these dispersive forces, it is talking about inbreeding. It is talking about inbreeding. Then apart from that, it is even talking about the genetic drift. The genetic drift. So these Falconer forces have to be discussed here. And there is another aspect where you can discuss these Falconer forces. It is with respect to the cause of variation. This is one aspect, the cause of variation, the spread of variation. The third aspect is the fixation of variation. So such three dimensions can be discussed: the cause of variation, the spread of variation, and the fixation, along with the 6 different forces that are given. One is the migration, one is mutation, the other one is selection, inbreeding, and genetic drift. Straightforward question, my dear. We only have to recognize that the evolutionary forces are nothing but those factors which are resulting in human diversity, human variation, that you study as part of your man-animals, that you study as part of your man-family studies, right? Now moving on to the next question. Now when we move on to the next question, what is the historical development of the field work? And this question can be simply classified, because when you talk about the field work tradition, one particular thinker that comes to everybody's mind is Malinowski. And a simple structure that can be followed with respect to this historical development, that it can be classified into 3 different phases. One is with respect to the pre-Malinowski, the phase of Malinowski, and the post-Malinowski phase. Such a classification can be made: pre-Malinowski, during Malinowski, as well as post-Malinowski. And when you talk about this pre-Malinowski's phase, it has more to do with respect to your armchair anthropologist, and it has more to do with lot of commentaries, right, and lot of stories and lot of narratives that were present with respect to this. And here in this particular phase, in this pre-Malinowski's phase, the field work was more of a theoretical process. That conclusive remarks have to be made. It is more of a theoretical process. But whereas when the Malinowski's phase have arrived, it was more to do with the participant observation, especially the thing that has been done in the case of Trobriand Islanders by the Malinowski, right? It has got to do with more of a participant observation. Then post Malinowski, we see one particular advantage that is happening with respect to this fieldwork tradition is that the methodologies of fieldwork started to evolve. The methodology started to evolve. Apart from the methodology started to evolve, we also see that there is an incorporation of technology, right? Incorporation of technology. For example, we come across the concepts like digital ethnography, and we also come across something like radiometric archaeological surveys. Now all these are fundamentally talking about the utilization of technology in the context of the fieldwork traditions. That's what was supposed to be emphasized, and this is again a repeated question from 2019. And 7C, discuss the approaches of Leslie White. Okay. 1. Julian Stewart and Marshall Solens in the light of cultural evolution. And when we talk about this question is nothing but it is asking about the concept of neo-evolutionism. The concept of neo-evolutionism and what is the perspective of neo-evolutionism in the context of cultural evolution, right? Because when you look at the syllabus, you know that there are 4 neo-evolutionists along with Leslie Alvin White, Julian H. Stewart, along Solens and Service. Along with him, you also have G.V. Child. And when we discuss about this Leslie Alvin White, the famous theory that is given by Leslie Alvin White is culturology. And we also talk about something called as culture energy approach that is given by Leslie Alvin White. The second aspect that we discuss, that means you would have come across this particular phenomena that culture is equals to E into T. That is what you would have come across. Then when you talk about the Julian H. Stewart theory and the approach, the Julian H. Stewart is the culture ecology approach. The culture ecology approach. And when you talk about the Marshall Solens approach, the Marshall Solens approach is got to do with the biocultural approach. The biocultural approach, and this approach is more of a composite kind with respect to the other neo-evolutionists. Along with that, we also talk about the general evolution and the specific evolutionary principles as a form of approach that is given by Solens in the context of the neo-evolutionism. You have to detail or elaborately talk about this, right? Then moving on to the next question. Here we see that discuss the contemporary population problems. Discuss the contemporary population problems in the light of various socio-cultural demographic theories. And here when we are discussing about the population problems, the first theory that comes to our head is the Malthusian theory of population. The Malthusian theory of population that is given with respect to the relation of the food as well as the population that is existing. Then apart from that, we can even talk about the Dumont's theory. Dumont's theory with respect to the social capillarity theory. Then apart from this social capillarity theory, we can even talk about the Nitty's principle. The Nitty's principle of individuality. The Nitty's principle of individuality. Then we can even talk about the Leverstein theory that is related with respect to the population and economic growth. Now the question is asking about that the respective population problems as well as the demographic theories. These two have to be interrelated. Right? Then moving on to the next question, it is about what do you understand by the different blood group systems? How is HLA system different from red cell antigens? Now when we look at this question, after a long time, there has been a question that is asked from the chapter 9.6 of the paper-1. And when you look at this, they are asking about the genetic markers. And the understanding with respect to blood group system, we know that there are different variations that are present with respect to the blood group system. And when we talk about these different variations that are present with respect to the blood group systems, what can be seen is we have to emphasize about the concepts like multiple allelism. Apart from multiple allelism, we can even talk about the genetic polymorphism because both of them are coexistent. Then apart from this, now here we talk about the blood group systems, and we know there are different kinds of blood group systems, ABO blood group system, MN blood group system, KD blood group system, right? So MN blood group system, all these are different blood group systems that are existing. And then we go on to talk about that how is HLA system different from those of the red cell antigen. Now in this context of differences between two different kinds of genetic marker, the first difference that can be seen is what is the chromosomal position. When you talk about HLA, it is chromosomal number 6, and when you talk about red cell, it is chromosomal number 9, and when you talk about the RS factor, it is chromosomal number 1. So, one is with respect to the chromosomal position that we talk about the difference that is existing between HLA systems and red cell antigen. Apart from the chromosomal system, we will also have to see with respect to, that what is the significance of such a system. And apart from talking about significance, we also have to see what is the variation that is existing in the system. For example, when you talk about HLA system, we know that there are variations that are existing with respect to HLA system, and when we observe this kind of variation, it might be HLA A type, it's HLA B, HLA C, HLA D, and HLA AD kind of variations that are existing. We have 5 different alleles that are present. And when you talk about ABO, we know that there are 3 different alleles that are present with respect to your ABO. And when you look at the corresponding significance of HLA type and the corresponding significance with respect to HLA type, it is about tissue typing, it is about tissue matching, it is about tissue compatibility, and a factor called MHC is going to exist whenever we are discussing about HLA systems, right? And here this can be even emphasized that one particular interrelation or dynamism that can be brought in with respect to HLA is with respect to the immunogenetic method of man family studies. The immunogenetic method of man family studies can also be talked about whenever we are discussing about HLA system here. Then we are talking about the red cells, and when you talk about the red cells, the significance is with respect to your blood typing. And one aspect that can be talked about here is erythroblastosis fetalis. That aspect can be talked about this. Okay, so this is all about this particular question, right? And moving to the last question of the paper 1, and when you look at this particular question, discuss how the anthropological knowledge of the human body may be used in designing equipments and the articles of human use. And when you look at this particular question, it is nothing but it is emphasizing upon the application of design anthropometry. It is emphasizing upon the application of design anthropometry. And when you talk about this application and emphasis of design anthropometry, it can also be talked about, or we can even talk about ergonomics, right? The ergonomics concept can also be discussed here. And when we look at the fundamental utility of this particular knowledge, it is with respect to ensuring the efficiency. Along with that, it is also to ensure the specificity, and it is also to ensure the variation that is existing with respect to the population and its demands, right? All these aspects can be taken care. That variation can be with respect to race, that variation can be with respect to applications. As you know, these applications can be defense applications, these can be sports applications, these can be workspace applications, it can be industrial applications, or that variation can also exist with respect to these ethnic groups, right? Apart from this, we can even talk about that the gender perspective in designing. We can bring in the gender perspective with respect to designing of any of these equipments or articles of human use, for the reason that when you look at most of the machines, most of the machine design, or most of the ergonomics, they are more male centric. That gender inclusion perspective can be brought in with respect to this aspect. Okay, and again the trade element can also be brought in. Okay, so this is fundamentally showing that anthropology as a subject, it is multi-dimensional in nature, and such knowledge has multiple applications, right? That is what is this question talking about. Okay, so this is all about the paper 1 discussion, right? Stay tuned for paper 2 discussion, and please make use of such discussions, right? Now here what are we emphasizing? It is fundamentally about what is the structure that we are supposed to write, what is the nature of the interlinkage that is supposed to be made, because always please remember that there is so much of apprehension that anthropology as a subject, it is static in nature. Please don't be carried away by these thoughts, for the reason that anthropology is a very, very dynamic subject that can be made with the corresponding interlinkages that we had seen in this context of the discussion that we had made for paper 1. Thank you.